Today I would like to talk about tectonic activity and soil formation, mostly in the Kenya Rift and adjacent regions. And I would like to particularly try to convince you that studying these processes can help understanding how landscapes in continental rift systems provide particularly special environmental conditions for the advantage and disadvantage of grazing animals. Okay. If you are in the business of studying fault zones, you are used to the fact that vegetation often accumulates along fault zones. So you can often see these lines of vegetation where you suspect an active fault zone to be. And this is a picture I found online a couple of weeks ago of a stretch of the San Andreas Fault close to Palm Springs. And you can see this nice alignment of palm trees exactly where the fault zone is suspected to be. And you can not only see this on this small stretch of the fault, but if you plot a map view of the same region and you use a satellite image that allows you to highlight the vegetation. This is a so-called NDVI, normalized difference vegetation index of the region. And you can see that not only the anthropogenic irrigation systems and vegetation patterns are highlighted, but also in yellow and green, you can see the vegetation along the San Andreas Fault highlighted here. Yeah, so why is that? People have thought about this before, and to visualize the environmental consequences of tectonic activity on landscapes, this is a nice and very simplified cartoon that Jeff King and Jeff Bailey put together a couple of years ago. So basically, if you think about tectonically inactive low relief landscapes, any kind of water bodies are pretty sensitive to changes in precipitation and can dry out very fast if the water level drops, as you can see in this picture. If you think about another end member, so a very tectonically active, dynamic and complex landscape, a variety of different environmental conditions can localize along these complex parts of the landscapes, including wet and marshy regions directly where the fault zones are, also uplifted blocks that dry out faster, and a water level that reacts to the activity of these faults. In particular, if you think about these individual faults to move every once in a while, you can maintain a long-term environmental stability along the active fault traces, which allows these regions to regionally or locally buffer climate change for longer periods of time. And these processes have direct consequences for grazing animals. For example, if you look at a picture from the Lake Baringa region, we've seen the maps in the previous talk before, that's in the northern central Kenya Rift. This is a very typical picture of a landscape in that region. You have dry soils, shallow rocky soils on uplifted footwalls of the normal faults. You have very steep fault escarpments in volcanic rocks, and you have fertile soils on volcanic substrates with greater and more reliable availability of water. And if you look at the longer term signal of these landscapes, you can also see that in hominin site excavation regions, you find lots of fossil remnants of grazing animals in an assemblage of early hominin sites within the Kenya Rift and other tectonically active regions. So this suite of observations has motivated a team of archaeologists and geoscientists to look closer into the role of tectonic activity and soil nutrient distributions in the East African Rift as a proxy for better understanding the location of early hominin sites in that region. And I'm going to show you one example from the Kenya Rift, and I think we've briefly already talked about the Ologasali site in the southern Kenya Rift before. It is located in the southern Kenya Rift, and it's a very famous region for its high abundance of stone tools, Acheulean hand axes, and also a great abundance of mammal fossils associated with the site. Through dating of the individual lake beds and the occurrence of artifacts, one could see that this region has been inhabited for several hundreds of thousands of years on and off. So it's been a region of high attractiveness for early hominin inhabitants for a very long time. So what was so special about the setting, and which factors might have controlled the attractiveness and long-term hominins inhabitants of Olugusali? Actually, one of the clues of that probably lies in the present-day land use of that region. This is a picture just southwest of Olugusali, where the Olquejo Negro River incises into Pleistocene sediments into the former lake beds of Olugusali, where the artifacts have already been found. So you can see that nowadays, actually, Olugusali is right there in the background, and it's now uplifted relative to the riverbed by about 30 meters. That region is characterized by traditional Maasai sheep and goat herding. As you can see on that picture, there's lots of goat and sheep and cattle migrating seasonally across the landscape. And we've used that opportunity in the field to also talk to lots of the local shepherds there and ask them how these grazing patterns might have been controlled by the geological and tectonic conditions in the region. And we've learned quite a lot about basically how these animal herds would choose regions that were also, from a geological and soil scientific background, suspicious regions in terms of the potentially high soil nutrient content of the soils. So we've did a lot of soil sample testing and rock chemical analysis, and we've put together a simplified map of the soil nutrient availability of the Olugusali region. Purple is high soil quality and beige is low. And you can see how this kind of focuses around the Olugusali side, and also from the eastern towards the western rift. And in the dashed lines, you can see the present day animal grazing routes. And it's actually kind of neat to see how they correlate also with the locations of past hominin sites in that region. In addition, we also did a paleo landscape reconstruction of that region. So basically retroformed some of the faults that were responsible for draining that lake around Olugusali that has been present during the hominin inhabitants. And if you do a very simplified paleo landscape model of that region, now the view is actually 90 degrees rotated. North is to the left. You can see that one of the possible main animal migration routes would actually lead along the Olugusali Acheulean site. So it's basically located along a strategically important location in the landscape for as long as the lake was present. So going from the past towards the present, we could demonstrate that the importance of combining the analysis of tectonic activity and soil nutrient patterns for animal migration is an important tool to understand how a landscape provides beneficial or disadvantaged conditions for animal dynamics. And so we thought it might be interesting to also look at more different locations where we can see present-day animal migrations throughout Africa. And we have right now several projects in Eastern and Southern Africa going on with a number of collaborators that are listed on the left-hand side here. And I'm going to focus on one of the studies that actually has just been published by Alina Ludat. And this is located in the Serengeti Mara region in the Kenya-Tanzania transboundary region. So right here. So the Serengeti wildebeest migration is probably one of the most famous examples of seasonal animal migrations. Everyone knows these stories about over 1 million gnus, zebras, and other animals migrating through the Serengeti Mara National Park seasonally. And it's probably one of the best studies animal migrations worldwide. However, most of the studies focus either on the ecological, climatic, or biological perspective of this animal migration. And with this study, we would like to add some interesting geological points to the whole story. If you look at the Serengeti-Mara region in detail, this is a combined map of the topography and the land use patterns in that region. One potentially one geological source that feeds the nutrient input of the Serengeti-Mara region is already known, and that is the Oldonyo-Lengai carbonatite volcano. It's a pretty unique volcano, the only active carbonatite volcano in the world that has a very particular composition of lava, very high in sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. And it, as it erupts, it transports lots of ash towards the southeastern sector of the Serengeti. So this region is characterized by very high calcium levels in the soils, and very immature but very productive soils. So basically, this picture you see on the upper right is one of these famous pictures of large herds of wildebeest grazing on these volcanic ash deposits, which is only active as long as you can maintain high rainfall. And once that stops, the soils fall dry, and the animal herds move towards the central part of the ecosystem. And in that region, thank you. In that region, you can see already on the satellite image that the soils are pretty bare. This region is characterized by high soil erosion, by degraded soils that develop on Archean basement. So this is also why this region is only used for sort of transitory grazing of animals for a short period of time. And as they move through the landscape, they move towards the north. And I would actually like to spend some time talking about the northern sector of the Serengeti-Mara ecosystem, because that region is actually severely understudied in terms of the animal dynamics there, but it's interesting from both a tectonic and geological point of view. It's a region where the East African rift system kind of picks up again, because you have the Isuria-Utimbara fault system that is like an almost east-west striking fault system that's dated through sort of rough age estimates of a series of Neogene lava deposits. That's this green unit here, and so it post-dates these deposits, and so it's younger than 4 million years. This fault zone hasn't really been on the map of active faults in East Africa yet, but we've identified very convincing data that this fault has probably been active in late Pleistocene, probably Holocene times. And what I would like to focus on during this talk is the ecological patterns that you can see in relation of this fault system. So again, an NDVI image on the left-hand side. So vegetation in green, bare soil in purple. This is a 5-year mean estimate of the vegetation coverage of that region. You can see that there's some stable spots of vegetation in that region. Some of them are not related to fault activity, but most of them are. So you can see along the Isuria escarpment, the Utimbara escarpment, the fault-controlled Mara wetland, and also fault-controlled hot springs in that region, that you have some stable regions of vegetation, which also correlate with the distribution of soil moisture. So the soil moisture stress is the lowest along the tectonically active region, and also the accumulation of clay, so that's the clay mineral ratio, is also the highest or among the highest along the active fault zone. So there's a combination of different features that show positively, that are positively correlated to the activity of faults in that region. And to zoom in a little more, you can see some features that are particularly interesting, like these small-scale fault-controlled alluvial fans along the Isuria fault, and you can see how they show up in both the NDVI and clay mineral ratio maps. So probably through transport of sediment as a consequence of tectonic faulting, you can see how this serves as both a water storage and a provider of vegetation and clay. And last not least, the Mara wetland is a fault-controlled basin. It's a half-graben system, and it has the highest vegetation stability, and also serves as a water clarifier towards the Lake Victoria to the west, because this basin is actually a bit deeper than Lake Victoria, and all the water that sheds from Mara River enters the Mara wetland and goes through this papyrus swamp here and gets at least partly clarified as it moves through the system. So yeah, to add this part of the Serengeti Mara ecosystem to the map, we do not only have a geological nutrient engine in the southeast, being the Oldonyo-Lengal volcano, but we have a second one in the north, which is likely a combined effect from tectonic faulting and enhanced erosion along the fault escarpment, which stabilizes vegetation and accumulates clay in that region. So to sum up, the East African rift system is characterized by strong gradients in soil nutrient availability, which force animals to migrate through the landscape. We can use the present-day information of the region to better understand long-term human land use patterns in that region. And knowledge of the geotectonic framework helps to better interpret both climatic and biological drivers of animal migrations in these tectonically active settings. And last not least, I would like to point out that Alina Ludot's paper about the Mara River system has just been published in Biogeoscience as of last Wednesday, so very good timing of this talk. And she also just got the EGU OSPP award for her poster about that topic this year. So thank you very much for your attention, and yeah, I'm happy to answer questions.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Simon. Very nice talk. Do we have any questions? Please put them in the chat. René, if you haven't seen it, there's one question for you in the chat. That's actually for me. Simon, I would have one question.
Yes.
It is, are there people raising their hands? No, it's just clapping. This fault system, this Usira-Utimbara fault system
Yes.
that you mapped out, do you have any indication of how fast it's kinematically moving? And if so, how long will it take until it is lower than the northernmost outflow point of Lake Victoria, so that Lake Victoria starts to drain in another direction?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we don't have so we haven't been in the field yet there. So this is all a remote sensing study so far. We plan to go on the field as soon as we got funding for that. We have a very rough estimate on the long-term fault displacement rate of that fault system based on the age of the neogene lava. So and this comes down to a fault displacement rate of roughly 0.1 millimeters per year. So to answer your second question, I don't have an immediate answer, but you can actually calculate this yourself, I suppose, once you know that rate. It's probably going to take a while because the fault is relatively slow, as you would expect for continental faults. And also you have pretty high sedimentation rates from the Mara River catchment. So this might actually be a counter process to actually reach a basin depth that would be relevant for draining of the Victoria Basin to the south.